Okay, so we can start. So today's webinar is called Beyond Technical Solutions, Water Governance, Power, and Socio-Ecological Change. Before starting, we can talk about the house rules. So the session is being recorded and it's going to be available on EADI's website and YouTube channel if you want to check it later. We also would like to ask you to keep your cameras on to interact with us during the panel. You can also use the chat box to introduce yourselves, to share comments, and also post useful links you would like to exchange with us. Lastly, I would like to remind you to keep your microphone muted while you're not speaking, but then we're gonna also have the chance to interact during the Q&A session. So to start with, my name is Anna. I work at EADI, and in this session, we're going to have a small introduction, and then we're going to have the speaker's presentation. Each one of the speakers will have 15 minutes to talk, and then we're going to have a Q&A discussion during 15 minutes. And then we're going to close with 5 minutes remarks. So to start with, water is a very important topic to everyone, and it's often discussed in terms of infrastructure, engineering, scarcity, efficiency, and service delivery. While these dimensions remain very important, today's discussions invite us to look beyond technical solutions and engage with deeper questions, such as who has access to water and who does not? Who makes decisions about water governance? Who do power relations shape the distribution of water resources and services? And how are climate change, environmental degradation, and social inequalities reshaping water futures around the world? So our speakers challenge us today to see water not simply as a resource to be managed, but also as a social, political, ecological, and developmental issue. And their work reminds us that water governance is fundamentally about people, institutions, rights, and power, as much as it is about infrastructure and technology. A common assumption is that water-related challenges can be addressed through improved technologies or also expanded infrastructures, as we see here in one of the pictures, or more efficient management systems. Despite significant technical investments, many regions still face persistent inequalities in access to water and sanitation, for example, or growing conflicts over water resources, increasing climate-related pressures and governance failures that undermine sustainability and equity. So these challenges often place disproportionate burdens on women, marginalized communities, and other vulnerable populations. So understanding these realities required us to move beyond purely these technological approaches and examine the broader social and political context which water is governed. So this is precisely what we are going to talk about. We're going to talk about today, and we're going to hear from our speakers. So to start with, I would like to introduce Carlo Rodríguez-de-Francisco. He's an ecological economist and senior researcher in environmental governance at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability. His work areas are conservation and natural resources management, ecosystem services and society, ecological distribution conflicts, biodiversity and climate change, political economy. We also have Professor Farhana Sultana. She's a professor in the Department of Geography and the Environment at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at the Syracuse University. She's also the research director for the environmental collaboration and conflicts in the program for the advancement of research on conflict and collaboration at the Maxwell School. We have also Ariadna Torrent. She's a PhD candidate at the Center for Sustainability Development Studies at the University of Amsterdam, and her research focus is on urban water metering technologies in Cape Town, South Africa, using this case to examine how to study the afterlives of technologies within processes of urban and environmental transformation. So first, I give the floor to Professor Farhana.
Well, thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are. I'm going to just show you a few slides, and I'll talk fairly quickly through my work, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I want to also thank the European Association of Development Research and Training Institutes, or EADI, for convening this conversation and inviting me to speak. We're surrounded now by headlines about the global water crisis, as we have seen in the news, or as Anna has just mentioned. So what I want to do today is think about, like, how do we think about water governance, power, and justice beyond the technical fix? So we know that we hear news like drought, but then infrastructure collapse and day zero in cities, floods, drinking water crises. And the solutions on offer from governments, development agencies, financial institutions tend to follow a script about things such as better data, or more efficient infrastructure, smart technologies, pricing mechanisms, optimized management. So these are the kind of buzzwords or terms or processes and policies that come up repeatedly. So I want to ask why these solutions are offered, yet they keep failing to deliver equity. So why do we have so many people earnestly working, and yet we have over 1 billion people who do not have clean, safe drinking water on a reliable basis every day? And at the same time, we have a lot of money going into water security, water equity, or we have had, and yet right now we're facing all kinds of new challenges with growing data centers and so on. So I want to say that, part of this is because of the myth of the technical fix. They fail because these approaches, or these buzzwords that I just mentioned to you, they rest on a myth. They rest on this myth of the technocratic fix, which assumes that water is H2O, a natural commodity to be measured, piped, and priced, and allocated. It treats water insecurity as a math problem of supply and demand, or a physical problem of scarcity. But water is never just a chemical compound of H2O. Water is political, social, economic, ecological, spiritual, and emotional. It moves through the hydrological cycle where it flows, and the water carries with it the flows of social power, of wealth, of privilege, of history. Water governance is a question of power, institutional arrangement, structural inequality, and socioeconomical disparities. So some people, or some policies, or some institutions present this reality as a technical challenge, but applying that to a technocratic band-aid to a structural wound does not heal it. So we need to start figuring out how we move beyond the technical solutions. And I'd like to propose that we apply some insights from feminist political ecology. So feminist political ecology is a critical framework that examines how political economies, colonial legacies, and capitalist structures land in lived embodied realities of water insecurity on the ground. But we tend to see that it is often reduced to be a head count of, let's say, women on water committees, or gender as a tick box at the end of a project. And that reductionism actually tends to really destroy the approach of what a more robust feminist approach would be. So what feminist political ecologists do is they ask about the foundational questions of power and ecological and socioeconomic disparities. So who gets water, who decides, who profits, who is left behind, water from where, and at what cost to both the ecology, to people, and to the wider, at scale, at different scales, to different political economies. So first thing this land dismantles is the fiction of a homogeneous community. So policy documents that talk about, let's quote unquote, the community, quote unquote, the poor, quote unquote, women, as flat and uniform categories tend to do it disservice. Because water insecurity does not work that way. It is shaped by embodied intersectionality of gender, class, race, caste, ethnicity, citizenship, and more, which dictates everyday realities of water access, water pricing, and the ability to quench one's thirst and provide for one's household, but also for one's cities. So for instance, in my decades of fieldwork across South Asia and North America, and in global urban contexts elsewhere, I've watched these different intersectional axes operate. For instance, wealthy women in an elite neighborhood and working class women in an informal settlement or a favela or shantytown may live in the same city, but they inhabit entirely different water realities. For the marginalized women, water is a daily exhausting struggle. It is the labor of walking long distances, the insecurity of having access on a daily basis, hours waiting in a line, negotiating with vendors, the ability to pay or not pay, threats of harassment and violence at public standpipes or when bringing water back to the home. It is also about pollution and about pipe failures and pipe excavations by the city authorities. But for those who are on the grid or can pay the city municipality for water, usually which is subsidized, that daily anxiety does not exist. But so technocratic models ignored this dimension of water, the bodily and the emotional toll. Water marginalization is an embodied experience because people suffer water in their bodies. If it's contaminated, you're sick. If it's insufficient, you're dehydrated. If you do not have it, you have to labor to go secure it. And you may suffer the indignity of what it means to contest for safe water in an unsafe environment. A mother may lay awake calculating whether enough water is there to cook for her children in the morning, or she may carry heavy vessels until her body registers the cost. That is the structural violence written into bodies and communities that statistical indicators do not always capture, and smart meters rarely fix. But none of this is accidental, and none of it is recent. Present-day water access is a sediment of history and scalar decisions. It carries the imprint of who built what, for whom, and on whose land and with what labor. Colonial and post-colonial water infrastructure rarely were built for universal access. They served extraction, administration, and elite or settler populations. Those geographies of access are still in place. The pipes run where the power ran, where the money ran. And this is why a new treatment plant or a new allocation rule so often tends to underperform. It drops into an already unequal field, and without confronting that field, it reproduces the already very unequal scenario that it was meant to relieve. So we have to interrogate what passes for good governance. The last decade or so brought a push towards decentralization of market mechanisms and community-led schemes, all framed as empowerment. Introducing participatory schemes in a context that already had deeply unequal societal fractions, and then participation gets weaponized. Local elites can capture the committees. They dominate decisions and reinforce hierarchy. Yet at the opposite end, the landless, the lower class, the racialized, the poor working women are excluded in substance, even when their name sits on the attendance sheet to satisfy the checkbox. And the same logic runs through the current SDG 6 that we are trying to still achieve. It targets for universal water and sanitation, and that matters but it's a flawed indicator-driven process right now. It counts pipes laid and latrines built, and it prioritizes neat, marketable metrics over politics of control, ownership, governance, and the failures built into various problematic processes and procedures in place. So states and corporations then end up claiming success on aggregate numbers while systemic exclusion continues underneath. The metric is met on paper, but the injustice is untouched. And this is also where water connects to everything around it, such as land dispossession, agrarian crisis, neoliberal urban planning, and the compounding shocks of climate change. Climate change amplifies these pre-existing inequities. It is a lived reality felt now and felt through water. And as I've always said, climate change is nothing but water change. It's about too much, too little, what water, at wrong time, wrong place, or maybe even the wrong quality. So a drought or a flood exposes and exacerbates the vulnerabilities already engineered and baked into society. It does not invent them always. It exacerbates and can invent them. The communities that contributed the least to these problems tend to carry the heaviest burdens of water precarity. So where do we go? So what I want to argue is that if we want to push the language of the human right to water towards critical water justice and resource democracy, we need to recognize that, yes, declaring water as a human right was a very important, vital tool for us. Movements and community groups have used it to resist privatization and state neglect. A right can also be hollowed out, though. A state can declare water a human right while underfunding public infrastructure, privatizing communal resources, and leaving marginalized people to predatory informal markets. But water justice demands structural accountability. It works across three dimensions: distribution, which is who gets water, how much, of what quality, and at what cost to them; procedure, which means who sits at the table when water decisions are made and whose voice is treated, not as mere input to be managed; and then recognition, so whose knowledge, whose needs, and whose history count as legitimate. So recognition is where intersectional axes of gender, caste, race, and colonial history enter governance directly. It is where we value plural knowledges, such as indigenous, local, and feminist ways of knowing, rather than treating Western technocratic science as the only authority. So resource democracy follows from this, as I've argued in prior publications. The people most exposed to water insecurity belong at the center of designing and governing water systems. This means dismantling the patriarchal and colonial hierarchies that still set environmental policy. Water is a common public good and a shared vulnerability, not a commodity to be financialized for profit, but perhaps a commodity in the sense of recovering the cost of the labor that went into it and paying people for the labor they put in. So justice is the question that technical framings keep evading. Every time we treat water as a problem to be optimized, we postpone the question of who the system is for. The water crisis cannot be solved in a silo. So what I want to argue in my conclusion sentences is that it is bound up with struggle over land, labor, racial and gender justice, class justice, but also climate reparations. Moving beyond technical solutions takes courage. It means naming power, confronting historical inequality, and standing with the grassroots movements fighting for water justice on the front lines. As we know, water is always political and about power. Politics is lived in the body and the household. It is structured by histories of dispossession and reclamation. Technical solutions are not wrong, but they're just insufficient because they answer the easy question while leaving the hard one untouched. And this then becomes an ethical and political project. It is a demand for a world where no one's dignity is traded for a drop of water and where socio-ecological systems are governed through care, equity, and collective liberation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Farhana. It's very important to see this intersectionality and also to realize that SDG 6 is not enough and it's not going to fix everything. And speaking of that, I would like to invite Giancarlo to talk about that as well.
Thank you. Let me share my presentation. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So thank you very much, Anna, for the invitation. What I'm going to be presenting today is a commentary that we published recently in Water International, and it's a multi-author commentary by science, German, British, Chilean, and Colombian scientists. We all got together and decided to write this piece, thinking about the soon approaching deadline of the post 2030 agenda. And like what we try to bring forward in this is a central provocation by referring to water as waters, plural. It's not a grammatical mistake, but it's a deliberate argument that was very good explained by Professor Farhana, and that I will try to unpack along this presentation. So, despite some progress, billions of people still lack access to drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. Water use efficiency, although increasing globally, remains low in most countries, and water stress continues to be served in several regions of the world. The implementation of the integrated water resource management is advancing slowly, with transboundary water cooperation remain limited despite the large number of countries sharing water resources. Achieving Goal 6 requires global commitment to ensure that water security for all while protecting the planet's water resources. And in order to achieve that goal, we argue for a paradigm shift. We call for this shift in water governance away from approaches rooted in a singular technocratic understanding of water and the policy responses that typically follow from it, namely the creation of infrastructure development, technological solutions, and commodification, and toward more pluralistic, power-aware frameworks that recognize the diversity of water-related needs, knowledge systems, values, feelings, and lived experiences. We argue that prevailing SDG 6 approaches have largely overlooked power asymmetries, social justice, and the political dimensions of water governance. As a result, they have shaped dominant understanding of water challenges, influencing how such problems are framed, measured, and addressed. Looking beyond 2030, the success of global water initiatives will depend on their ability to engage with local realities, acknowledge diverse social and ecological contexts, and accommodate multiple understandings of water and of what the good life is. To capture this diversity of cultural practice, social relations, spiritual beliefs, and living landscapes, we adopt in the commentary the concept of water, similar to the Spanish aguas, which emphasizes the existence of multiple waters rather than a single universal entity. This perspective broadens the focus of water governance before physical access and infrastructure to include the social relations through which water is experienced, negotiated, and governed. In this view, water security is understood as a relationship that describes how individuals, households, and communities navigate and transform hydrosocial relations to access the water that they need, and in a ways that support their sustained development of human capabilities and well-being in their full breadth and scope. Such an approach foregrounds justice, power, and human capabilities, highlighting the need for governance systems that are responsive to the diverse ways of knowing, valuing, and living water. This has also been mentioned by Professor Sultana when she mentions that the persistent failure to achieve water security is not merely a technical or a financial shortfall, but a structural outcome of water governance that ignores justice. I pulled up this little graph here showing how different approaches to water highlight, for example, at the national level in the EU, the social aspects of water, but this is something that the Water Framework Directive fails to do. Um, and to exemplify how water is multiple in practice, I want to bring the example that we explained in our commentary about Antofagasta. And this is how the salinated water and mountain spring water are chosen by the communities that consume it. While fresh water is diverted to mining because Antofagasta is located in the north of Chile, urban residents receive desalinated water. You can see the picture of the desalination plant here. But residents overall, both in the coast and close to the desalination plants, prefer natural spring water, while standard quality indications show little differences. But water quality is not only technical; it also depends on the perception, on the social and cultural perceptions of the people. And the picture that you see here with the bottled water being put to block the road is the response of the local people in close to the water to the mines that have a shortage of water from this source and that they are claiming for that. Um, Another example that we use in our commentary is how peri-urban households in India don't use only one water. They manage three simultaneous types of water: reverse osmosis for drinking and cooking, intermittent pipelines or tanker trucks for washing and sanitations, canals and open tanks for everything else. Each source has a different cost, reliability, and social meaning. The policy implication is that you don't need a premium drinking water quality for every use. For example, it is still very contradictory that we are using pure water of high quality to flush our toilets. SDG's one-size approach not only misses this, it can actually destroy these different ways in which we use water. Um, um, when thinking about the limits of the technological fix or the technological solutions, we see that the World Bank Good Governance Framework and most mainstream water policy defaults to the same playbook: standardize, quantify, and deliver. But this model was designed for industrializing European cities in the 1850s, contexts that have almost nothing in common with the majority of the world today. It ignores gender dynamics, indigenous governance systems, seasonal practices, and cultural meaning. Worse, it actively produces scarcity by defining acceptable supply so narrowly that existing local solutions are rendered invisible or illegitimate, as we see in the Indian case. And when you price water as an economic good, the people with the existing local and when you price water as an economic good, the people with the least resources, rural communities, informal settlement residents, are the ones that uh, end up paying the high price, typically for tanker trucks. The work of Ariadna also demonstrates this dynamic. Low-income women of color bore the greatest physical and economic burden during the water crisis precisely because governance treated water as a technical supply problem rather than a social justice issue. We also have to think about what water security means. A purely supply-focused approach to water security cannot achieve true water security. Water must be understood as a social and political, as being socially and politically embedded, not just as a resource to be delivered. A reconceptualization of water security concept is criticized for neglecting the social and cultural and political dynamics underlying water scarcity. Shift towards a relational approach that reconfigures hydrosocial relations with the aim of this shift is to address the systematic causes that create water insecurity, focus on promoting more equitable access to water resources, emphasizing the importance of recognizing power asymmetries and understanding these power dynamics as crucial for grasping and addressing the relation aspects of water security. By looking beyond of how water is supplied through responses to drought and instead to look at how hydrosocial relations configure and are configured by such responses. In Colombia, for example, the municipality of La Carrera, very close to Bogota, where the Coca-Cola company bottling facilities situated, faced increased water shortages during the drought that happened on year 2024 due to El Niño. But while human water consumption was rationed, like the Coca-Cola company kept receiving the same amount of water despite the whole country being in a state of emergency because of the drought. And this highlights how the water security of the Coca-Cola water company is not the same of the communities living in La Calera, showing how water security, my water security perhaps might be the water insecurity of another person or group. When talking about power and water governance, we see that there are different dimensions of power that go from visible power, hidden power, and invisible power. And it's important to think about this and how prioritizing urban infrastructure over rural traditional system, it happens to come to the fore, even when the indicators 6B1 show like a really good progress in participation of local communities in water sanitation and water management. This also goes to show like the traps behind participation, because it's not the same that a person comes to a meeting and sits down while listening to what it's being told to them than actively co-managing and designing water interventions all along the way. So the recommendations that we bring forward in this commentary refers to 6 main fields. On governance, the paper calls for an adaptation pathways. Long-term flexible strategies could develop with communities, not only delivered to them. Critically, participation formats must be specifically designed to include marginalized groups, not just let them be in the room. Community-led planning should be legally mandated in water policies, and those plans must be both power-sensitive and binding. Technical solutions should stop defaulting to centralized pipelines. Pipelines will not save water scarcity per se. The recommendation is to actively stimulate parallel use of different water sources for different purposes. The Indian model as a feature, not as a problem. Traditional water harvesting and distribution methods should be encouraged alongside innovative ones. Co-development infrastructure guidelines with diverse stakeholders and require community representatives on review panels for every water infrastructure proposal. On the cultural side, we need to legally recognize customary water rights, as they are customary water rights are sometimes invisible to rules and legislation, but only where they are both sustainable and equitable, acknowledging that local traditions and communities can also encode inequality. Every water-related project must require a cultural impact assessment with ongoing monitoring, not just something that is done on a one-time basis, but regularly. On power and justice, specific demands should include legislation mandating quotas for women, youth, and indigenous people in water governance bodies, free, prior, and informed consent for all our water projects, and not only for indigenous or Black communities, but for all the communities affected overall, explicitly including desalination and interbasin transfers, and independent ombudsman for water justice and equity audits are some of the measures that we propose in the commentary. On the economic side, we propose to replace pricing as a management tool with social water tariffs for pipe urban water. For groundwater, community-based monitoring paired with rising block tariff, cheap for basic needs and progressively more expensive for heavy use. The goal is equity, not just efficiency. On data monitoring, we propose to fund community-based water monitoring programs, require all water data to be disaggregated by gender, ethnicity, and geography. Build open source platforms so communities can actually access and interrogate data about their own water system. Most importantly, mandate that local data, including cultural and spiritual meanings of water, be integrated into national planning, but not just as a add-on, but heavily considered. So the takeaway messages of the commentary is that we need to move from homogeneous technical H2O to plural relational waters, from infrastructure first and only to power sensitive context specific governance built by the communities that are affected by water problems. From commodification, be this in terms of water markets, payment for ecosystem services, and so on, to rights-based, equity-centered approaches, and from standardized metrics to citizen science and localized indicators. And here I also share some of the small documentaries that we have been working on how water is multiple in Colombia, Ecuador, and Portugal, and how communities contest conservation in different ways when it's under the idea that nature should be kept away from people if it wants to be intact. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlo, for sharing your research with us. I think the title is very provocative in some languages because we don't have this plurality of water, and it already challenges our brain to fight colonialism or even patriarchism. I really like the examples, the cases that you brought, because I'm also Latin American and I feel close to that. I think someone that has ever tried desalinated water would know that it's impossible to live on that. So yeah, I think water is a topic that brings all of us together. So now I invite Ariadna to share with us the case of South Africa.
Thank you so much, Anna. I will try. Oh no, what did I do? I'll try to now. Yes. Okay, so thank you so much. It was a pleasure to listen to Professor Farhana Sultana and to Carlo Rodríguez-de-Francisco his research, and basically because I read them before, and that always like is quite nice, right? To put faces to the citation names that you create and cite in your articles. So thank you for this opportunity. My name is Ariadna Romans. I do my research in the University of Amsterdam in the Department of Geography, Urban Planning, and International Development Studies. And 2 months ago, I started a PhD, let's say a doctoral process, but it was based on research that I've been doing for the last years. So in that sense, I am very happy to share what the orientation and what the ideas behind the PhD will be, and especially be open to like any comments or feedback that you guys might have that might be interesting to continue this research. To start with, I want to say that South Africa, and especially the city of Cape Town, went through a huge drought less than 10 years ago. It was a drought that not only mobilized the political aspect of the city, but also the economical, the social, the infrastructural, and let's say that it created a general panic that for some was unnecessary, but for some was apocalyptical. So there's very good paper by Millington and Shiba that explain it very well. And in that sense, we are already, the setting of my research is already in a place that has been and is living with a scarcity of water, both for geographic reasons, but also for like post-apartheid inequalities and let's say a geography and a space shaped by inequality itself. Cape Town also has a very dense and diverse population. It's a very different scenario. There's like parts of the city that like even seem different cities in a same place. And in this sense, like this unique geography, but also this unique historical and political assemblage makes it not only like a very interesting like perspective to see, but also a space in which a lot of different inequalities intersect. So it's a very unique case to understand that indeed you cannot understand water scarcity without understanding all the rest together, because it would simply not be of much profit. So I am basing this research and also this presentation on this paper that I shared in the chat, that it's called A Bounded Existence, Examining the Entanglement of Scalar and Intersectional Experiences of Water Scarcity in the Townships of Cape Town, South Africa. This article, published in Ecology and Society, basically explains how women experience, like the women from low-income communities, women who are like, let's say, impacted in all sense by inequality, how do they experience water scarcity? And as Professor Farhana Sultana said, not only how this impacts their daily lives, but also the emotional toll, the spiritual aspect, the water dignity perspective. But for the research that's relevant to us today, I have to say that in Section 27(1)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, it says that everyone has the right to have access to sufficient food and water, right? This right is very like well established in the Constitution and in other points. However, we all know that rights don't bring realities. In that sense, we need to do something in order to achieve them. So during this drought that like lasted from 2015 to 2018, there was a huge mobilization of the city to achieve what like they set as to avoid what they set as day zero. Day zero was the day, as the name implies, was the day where the reservoirs of the city in terms of water would be zero. So in that sense, the city prevented as much as they could arriving to that point. And there was a huge, massive, let's say, social communications in order to make people save water. However, some other sectors, while industries or maybe like some other spaces, were not as much pressured. So, but this is another debate that concerns another time. Since the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa states that people have the right to water, the government decided that there would be an allocation of water to each citizen, like a minimum allocation of water to each citizen who could not pay for this service. And this like allocation was 25 liters per person a day. 25 liters per person a day may seem a lot, but if we understand that, for example, during the drought in Barcelona, they were saying that they would allow 110 liters per person a day, and people already were panicking about how little water was that. Imagine how much it is, 25 liters a day per person, and in a context of like insecure informal settlement, in housing, in a context where there's a huge rate of unemployment, in a context where people cannot ensure their safety. So there's a lot of more inequalities added to that. To control that, people really did not overuse these 25 liters. They installed water meters in the backyards of people's houses. So these water meters, usually they look like this. They can also be of other colors and other shapes, but usually they are like this device that allows to count how many liters is this like household, and with people allocated per household, they are able to consume in a day. In this sense, when you look at this device, you would think that it's a technological tool because it is technology, right? It's made of technological materials. It has like a techno solution rationality, but this is also a society and an ecology component, right? Not only for the intervention to common good, but also for the control it implies to different and very specific groups of the society. These devices, like as you can see, this one, were installed in the backyards or in common places in these informal settlements, and they generated huge contestation. Huge contestation because the devices not always worked as they were assumed that they would work. Sometimes there were leakages. Sometimes people did not know that if they overused, they would have to pay extra, and in that sense, they would generate debt. There was a lot of miscommunication about what the devices would imply, and especially there was a lot of like misunderstanding, not as misunderstanding, but like people could not understand why it was so important to only achieve this amount of liters when their needs were extremely different. 25 liters per person a day for a person who has diabetes is not enough. For a kid is not enough. For a woman who's menstruating or a person who's menstruating is not enough. So in that sense, like there was a lot of like animadversion generated towards the device because the device did not account for the needs of the people. And in that sense, there was a movement, a contestation movement from the townships in which people were basically removing the water meters because they did not answer the needs that they were really having, and they felt it as an intrusion and as a control tool from the government to their own houses. After the drought, after the city overcame the lack of water thanks to rainy, like seasonal rains, and thanks to like other circumstances that were implemented, in 2019, the city decided to remove these water meters and to, let's say, declare the project as ended. However, in 2025, they introduced these water meters again with the narrative of them being smart meters. So they were trying to, let's say, respond to the main criticism that the previous meters received by reinforcing the technological aspects of it, by reinforcing the fact that they are more efficient, that they control leakages better, that you can contact them via WhatsApp with a very like one-to-one communication. And these are only some of the examples that show this. So what's the problem? What problem does this solution bring to the table? Let's say the assumption that we can generate a solution with more technology is first one of the issues, but also the fact that the very way that the problem was formulated was partial, technocratic, and detached from the social material realities that it was meant to address. To respond to this question, my doctoral project, my PhD, will use 4 different disciplines because these are the 4 disciplines that were given by the project. One is urban planning, the other one is international development, the other one is sociology, and finally communication sciences. But I don't want to take them as like different silos of knowledge, but rather I would like to understand them in a like compact and unified whole. First of all, following the principles of intersectionality that not a single problem can be like, let's say, extracted from each other, but also from the understanding that the problem, let's say, or that the situation of the water governance is not only related to water, but rather like intrinsically embedded in the context it develops. In this sense, and of course, there's like a lot of things that could be interesting to look at if you talk about the water meters project, but I want to focus on the values, the knowledge, and the imaginaries. The value as the attribution of value that we give to these water meters. For whom is this a good device, and for whom is this the enemy, or like an object to be contested? Which knowledges are we invisibilizing? Which knowledges are we listening to? Which knowledges are we prioritizing when we are thinking that the water meters are the response to, like, let's say, so-called good governance of the water in the city? And finally, I also want to understand to which imaginaries, which frameworks, which spaces of future thinking are these conceptualizations giving like space to, but also which imaginaries could we, through the lens of like urban political ecology, through the lens of decolonial feminist political ecology, to which imaginaries could we go if we changed, let's say, the angle from which we are trying to give solutions and give answers. In that sense, I already anticipated that I would look at urban political ecology and science and technology studies, but I will also be informed by feminist political ecology, decolonial theory, and action network theory. Especially, there's a very good book by Professor Farhana Sultana, Confronting Climate Coloniality, that is at the moment very, very helpful. And in that sense, this is the question that I will try to answer in 4 years, luckily, if I succeed, which is how do water metering technologies reconfigure relationships between water infrastructure and everyday urban life in low-income neighborhoods in Cape Town? And as sub-questions, let's say, as trying to answer the values, knowledge, and imaginaries, I will answer how forms of value are attributed to water metering technologies, their data, and water itself by different actors, and how do these become visible in the afterlives of water meters? Which forms of knowledge about water use and everyday life are rendered visible, obscured, displaced, or transformed through water metering technologies and their afterlives? And in what way do the afterlives of water metering technologies interact with the managers of urban water futures? I have not mentioned, and I think that was quite important, that the afterlife in this context, in this presentation, is understood as this second implementation of a project that already proved to be not the best solution. So why are we trying to follow the same recipe for a cake that was already burned? So in that sense, that is the start of my PhD. Of course, in 4 years, maybe these ideas change a lot. But I thought it was my humble contribution to this panel, and I thought it was good food for thought to at least continue thinking and at least continue interacting with each other's research. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ariadna. It was lovely to hear about your PhD. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to change the spotlight. It was lovely to hear about your research and also your plans for your PhD. I don't know, first I would like to open the floor to Professor Farhana and also Carlo to see if you have any comments on Ariadna's research, as she asked before. And then we can also open the floor for the participants to comment and also to questions, and then we can start our discussion. Unfortunately, we are a bit late and we would have around 10 minutes. But yeah.
I'm a bit curious about, what the audience may ask, because I know people will have to run off. So if they have questions, we could take those perhaps as well. If they want to put them in the chat, that's fine. But unless they want to have a show of hands, we can do that as well. Um, does anybody have any particular questions for us? Or I'm happy to pose one. I'm not seeing any in the chat or in the raise hands.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I'll mention as a to kind of start off our conversation is the fact that, as somebody I've been working on water issues for over 25 years, or even longer even, and it's been these kinds of issues. They came up in the 1990s, then in the first decade of the new century, then and then the 2010s, and now in the 2020s. So we're into like 30 years of talking about we need to move beyond the technical fix. Well, actually, the moving beyond is more recent, but then the critiques of the technical fix were there, especially large scale engineering solutions, while at the same time, there are a lot of proponents of it, especially like large scale flood control infrastructures. But as we've seen from more research and more collaborative and transdisciplinary, moving beyond academia to involve communities, different ontologies and epistemologies, to figure out how do we address these water issues. We have much more of a more refined, much more pluralistic and richer set of debates now than we did 20 years ago, or in the late 1990s. One thing that strikes me is that as new research emerges or critiques emerge and new solutions are proposed, there's this continued challenge in implementation where things fall apart, right? So Ariadna, you're looking at like Cape Town. It's been highly studied for decades. There's a lot of publications on it, a lot of different research, and yet there's this persistence. And Giancarlo, you talked about these issues of how the SDG 6 and plural waters. We've talked about plural waters for a few years and thinking about what does it mean and how do we address it, because it can remain at the level of the philosophical, or it can actually be implemented. For instance, the Municipal Services Project was doing it about a decade ago. Like, how do you bring different communities to understand the different meanings of water, and then how it can be valued, and how it becomes part of the ecology, the local community, but then also the local economy. I was just curious to know, as more scholars junior to me, where your thoughts are in terms of like this historical. I mean, for me, looking at it from a retrospect, I'm seeing that we've been saying similar things for a very long time, and we're not moving the needle enough. We move the needle a little bit, and then there's this revanchism that emergence, and it's emerging back in terms of fiscal cuts, in terms of the austerity measures, in terms of complete various different kinds of dispossessions. And we're seeing very, very problematic issues happening in the world in the last year in terms of what is getting priority, whose voice is counting more, and where the money is flowing. So, in terms of, just very quickly, if you wanted to just shed some light on, because you've obviously had to do the prior readings. So, things that many of us have published, decades ago. So, what your thoughts are in terms of where you see the needles have shifted.
And Carlo, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. Well, thank you very much for your question. I must clarify that before becoming an ecological economist, I was a pure economist, and I was really like my like my formation was really on these technical fix, understanding issues of water in this. And it was through like contact in realities of rural Colombia and in urban Colombia that issues of power came to the fore, and that raised my interest in actually studying how issues of power actually played out in the implementation of these technical solutions. And then from there on, I moved there towards towards what I'm now, what I'm becoming now, or what I am now. And like when I started doing this kind of research, I was trying to understand power in payment for ecosystem services. And there has been a lot said about power in ecosystem services, but this is like a policy tool that that really kind of resists any critical views on that, because it gets supported by ministries, um, by different scientists, like the epistemic community behind that. And sometimes I find myself writing things that I wrote, that I'm writing now already when I wrote them when I start doing my PhD. And I said, like, is there a will to learn, or is there like everybody remains in their horse, and then everybody is not able to see at the other side? And I think I come to realize that they're like the epistemic community behind that are like sustaining empowering this type of technical solution. They have great economical support from different sites that put this forward, have a lot of workshops, have a lot of policy influence, and it's something that perhaps more critical researchers do not have outside their same sphere of knowledge. So I can go to the Congress of the American Association of Geographers, and everybody's talking the same language, and I feel at home there. But if I go to another conference that it's perhaps more policy water related, then you see all these people coming with this power and influence to like define everything that sometimes is overwhelming. And I think it is also in how the power behind how we communicate our things, and like the need of policymakers to understand everything in blue as a blueprint that can be implemented everywhere in the same manner, because they are also not willing to engage with the complexity of the different realities. And I think this is something, so I would say it's on different ends where this lack of being able to get the message through and implement it in policy lies on. That's what I would say. Like if I have to give an answer right now, but there are of course other things to consider. But I think this is what I was thinking right now. Yeah.
Yeah. In my case, my bachelor's was in philosophy, and they've been answering to the same questions ever since the start of the days. So that, like, it's interesting that you mentioned this, because, of course, like in the water sector, it seems like we're repeating ourselves, and it's only been like that many decades, let's say. And then like you look at other disciplines and they're even worse, like trying to answer some questions, and but in that sense, like I think that the difference is that people do need water to survive, right? And like some of us can have like questions about, is there something behind us, is there something beyond us and stuff, but like like water is a really material need for everyone. But there is a tendency, and this I say from my humble opinion, like there's a tendency of not solving things that don't work, and there's a lot of like researchers doing that. And there's a very brilliant sentence from Lauren Berlan that said, why do we still feel attached to lives that no longer work, right? And like, we know that this doesn't work, or at least completely, right? Like maybe it works for some, or it works in a certain point. But we still have this like reticence. The easy answer is capitalism, and then with that we solve everything, and that's it. But I think like there's genuinely like as Carlo said, like there's a lack of listening, right? There's a lack of like trying to listen to what other disciplines are trying to do, trying to listen to like instead of criticizing, for example, oh, these people is saying mainstreaming SDGs and this is so basic. Instead of saying that, like you should do, like, why is these people speaking in this language? Maybe because it's the only language that policymakers understand. And then this is the only way in which you can actually pose a message, right? So in that sense, I think I have a lot to learn. But there's an interest on trying to, instead of criticize, like trying to understand why do people speak different like languages or different even different, yeah, like the different terminologies, right? Like why, for example, if I go to a hydrology conference, probably I will understand 40% of what they're talking about, and it's still water, right? So yeah, I see that there's questions in the chat. So I don't know, Anna. Like,
yeah, so maybe before going to the questions on the chat, we could continue with Professor Farhana's opinion. Do you have an idea on why we seem to insist on no working solutions, as Malika asked in the chat?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I was looking at that question and the one below it because they're very linked, and then also the one they're all kind of interlinked in the sense that why do we talk about solutions that don't work in different contexts? Because we're trying to find what makes it not work. Because if you don't, it's like, why do you go to a doctor when you're ill, right? You want to diagnose the problem so you can figure out the solution. So we keep like trying to the job of the academic, in my long experience, has been to critique. We get paid to critique. That's our job. If we didn't critique, people would get away with all kinds of stuff around the world, right? So, and then that critique is now under threat, under attack. Because like Ariadna said, whether it's capitalism or imperialism or white supremacy or heteropatriarchy, things that work for some people, they want to keep it that way. So, so we're looking at solutions that don't work in multiple places for multiple reasons. So the critique is almost persistent. It's just a reason why, for instance, the parallel I give is the healthcare industry, because humans will always fall ill. Solutions are always imperfect. So that's like the easiest answer to that. So maybe the flip side to that question, my sense is that in anxiety, then why are we not finding working solutions? So when I teach my course on water governance, I get this question a lot. Why are we critiquing? Why are we looking at solutions that don't work? Because look at the rationale. You'll find similarities and dissimilarities. You'll find what I call the road to hell is paved with good intentions. People don't set out, not all people set out to be evil about water policy or implementation or infrastructure. They set out to solve a real need. Mm-hmm. But somehow things fall apart because there's a gap. And this is what we're looking at. The approach, the epistemology, what I call, the technical fix is insufficient. It's part of a solution, but it's not the only solution. But that keeps getting prioritized over and over again. Or the economic solution, like, Carlo mentioned, that, there's this kind of almost like this fetishization of economics as a discipline. So we must get the numbers right. We must get the profit margin right. So then you have capitalism that comes off the wave of this economic modeling, that therefore the profit maximization must be more important than providing water to the poor. So things get distorted over time, right? They don't always start out that way. And I think this links to the second question that was posed directly to me, that absolutely the development sector is tied up in this. So the development sector tries to fix and does fix a lot of the water challenges, whether it's a public health issue, whether it's a flooding issue, whether it's an issue around access and coverage. You know, they need to build more pipes to reach different communities. And this question says, you know, like, what is their role and spaces for reflexivity to address Western shaped path dependencies and fragmentation in water governance? That's an excellent question, because there's fragmentation. So it links to that first question. Why don't things work? There's a lot of ministries not talking to each other, budgets that are overlapped. There is problems of corruption. There's leakage, literal leakage from pipes, but also leakage from the programs from municipalities. There's inefficiencies built in. But at the same time, there's this, the backdrop of it in terms of throughout much of the global south that inherited those colonial water infrastructures, they've maintained it. So what they're doing is, it's that baked in that I talked about. It's a form of extractivism and elite water provision. It was meant to provide water to the colonizers. It wasn't meant to provide water to everybody. Then slowly, you know, they called it benevolence or whatever you want to call it. The European kings wanted to get rid of what they called the stinky peasants, right? The Queen of or Kings of England didn't want smelly people in Cheapside and east of London. So therefore you had this public hygiene campaign and, you know, the bacteriological city, and, you know, you needed to have fresh water everywhere because cleanliness was godliness, and all of this discursive, you know, kind of, it's a slop almost. Before AI slop existed, we had these word salad soups, but there were good intentions. People wanted to provide water, but they're often wrapped up in these kind of Western shaped path dependencies, and there's this water governance problem. But having worked in the United Nations managing large programs, I can tell you that it's people who are intentionally trying to do good or think they do good, but they get caught up in the system itself, in the way the system is very rigid. All systems tend to be rigid, whether you want to talk about the government, the state, a particular ministry, the United Nations, the World Bank. You know, things change. They change over decadal time. They don't change over a month. They don't, and the tyranny of the project cycle. The funding is for 5 years. You do not solve societal inequity in 5 years. And that's often the problem that you have to solve. And how do you make it worth everyone's while to see that providing water for everyone is worth their while, right? Rather than it's profitable, or so there has to be some sort of this collective ownership, this collective sense of approach to solving a problem. And I think this is where, yes, the development sector, the donor industry, but then also the people who benefit from it. Some people want to have problems persist because it's revenue generating for them. So there you have it, like a very condensed set of commentaries on, you know, development geography and international development, but then also how it intersects with water. And this is exactly why we tend to see, yes, increasingly more people have safe water around the world. Yes, more people have hygiene wash programs are working somewhere, but then it's for the amount of money going in, the amount of personnel, amount of good ideas. We haven't fixed the problem. The problems keep reemerging, and it is because where implementation does tend to fall apart, because it's about power. Some people would rather benefit from the system not working. So we have the money in the world, all the money in the world, we have all the technology in the world. What we're lacking is political will, and then also willpower of some, especially those in power, to really, really enforce a change. So I'll leave it at that.
Would you like to add anything, Giancarlo or Ariadna? No? Okay.
I can only agree.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a big lecture, but I just saw all these very interesting connections across the different questions.
So maybe to finish in a good mood, do you have any practical examples and approaches of addressing power dynamics in water beyond critiques? But I mean, in this good way, do we have good examples right now that you could share, and also other countries could, I don't know, get inspired? Up to you. Who wants to start?
I don't know
You've
if
spoken enough. I'll let others start.
Okay. Ariadna?
I don't know if that's exactly like a solution. I really like the work of a colleague of mine here in the University of Amsterdam, Emily Ragos. She does like body mapping. So she like analyzes water as part of like an embodied experiences, and she does body mapping with residents to try to understand in which ways the water scarcity or the water flooding affects their daily lives. And I think that kind of methodologies that mixed maybe more medical sector and anthropology. She's a nurse like she's a nurse and an anthropologist. I think this kind of like techniques, this kind of research methodologies are very promising. Of course, I'm in the very beginning of my career, so there's some things that I'm still discovering. But like to me, these kind of methodologies and being shared with each other, they can bring a lot of like knowledge that maybe we are, as Farhana, like as Sultana said, and like unconsciously avoiding, right? Maybe we're meaning well for other things, but like looking at the subject as the primary source of what's going on with water flooding, for example, I think that's a brilliant technique, and I think that's a brilliant way to start at least.
Nice.
For example, when it comes to water monitoring, and I have come across several very nice initiatives in Ecuador that are grassroots based, in which communities engage together with an NGO that's called EADI. I don't mean to do any propaganda here for them, but they really try to they really combine the knowledge of the technical knowledge that the NGO has with the local knowledge of the comuneros from this part of close to Chimborazo. And what they do is they actually try to monitor how changes in grassland use for sheep feeding affect water availability during dry seasons. And this is one of the landscapes that is one of the roughest I have been. Wind, cold, very high, and everything. But like these two joining forces together have managed to actually recreate water and reproduce water in a way that no other intervention has been able to. And I think that if you want to see also the positive side of water management, like just go to any community in the global south and you see like the start that they have in sticking to water and just fighting and managing it despite the government not being there. And I think this is something that like always fills me up with hope whenever I come and see the World Bank saying this and that, but I see what is happening down in the local ground, and I think it's full of nice examples.
Professor Farhana? Very short one, because we are almost running out of time.
Yeah, I think I've said a lot on this topic already.
No. We're never tired of listening to the three of you and sharing your experiences.
I think,
super nice.
When we think about, how do we move forward, one of the ways to think is like, how did we, looking back, and then also what are the different imaginations that we need? What do we need to move forward in better ways? And I think one of the things that that really, when we want to think about, positive methodologies, positive approaches, or positive policies or outcomes, we need to see what are some of the success stories and what made it work against all odds or over time. And one of the things is that you'll find that people first started with something that seemed like a very big claim, that seemed impossible, or that was possibly laughed away at. For instance, when people said, hey, water is a gender issue, they were like, well, no, it doesn't matter, because again, those are like, like we talk about like power, the hidden power, and then these are the invisible powers. They're the substrata of how society organizes itself. Or if we say, hey, look, these are, infrastructures of extraction, whether it's data centers, large dams, and it's benefiting some people and disempowering others. And what is the geopolitics behind it? So maybe applying the nationalist lens isn't enough. We need to go wider into the, so those, when somebody proposes something new, there's often resistance. So I think the way we can think about, novel solutions or more equitable solutions in moving forward is to think, and, I want to kind of end on the imaginary. If you can't imagine it, if you can't see it, you can't make it happen. So we need to figure out, how do we then collectively come together? How do we build solidarities across differences? So not just the like-minded or speaking to the choir, but across differences. So that means conflict resolution, right? Building consensus. That's about, what's worth giving up and what's worth savings. And that's dialogue. And those things are where we need to spend, I think, more attention in terms of trying to bring people together to figure out much more in terms of not just fake consensus and fake participation, but just really having the courage to say, hey, we need to maybe think about care and care ethics in water policy. And right now, this is seen as very bizarre, because we're still in the technical trap. We're still in the economistic trap. We're still under hyper-consumption, under, capitalist imperial models. But maybe in 100 years' time, that will be the norm. We don't know. So somebody has to say something that seems outrageous at first, and then it seems normalized. Then it has to be critiqued, because there's always failures. And there will always be gaps. And it is, again, like I said, it is a responsibility to find the problems so you can fix the problems early on. It's the same thing, like I said, you try to diagnose the patient early. You don't wait until they're on their deathbed. So I'll leave it at that.
True. So thank you so much. Thank you also to Holland Brunner. He shared like a nice example here in Britain about the One Great campaign in the British Blue community. We own it for the nationalization of the water service. Thank you for sharing. This also reminds me that I also learned it a very long ago about the case of Bolivia. That first there was a huge privatization of water, and then the people took out the streets, and then they managed to publicize it again. I would like to thank you, all of you that were here with us today. Thank you for sharing your time, sharing your thoughts. It was a very nice conversation, and I hope we can continue talking about this topic and other transdisciplinary topics as well. So if you want, you can subscribe to our newsletter. You can also check in how to become an EADI member. But mostly of our events are open for the public. So feel free to check, and also email me if you have any questions. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao. Bye.